Well, good morning, everybody. We've been making presentations at various groups the city has in regards to a possible 1 cent sales tax that the council is considering at this point. And we've been talking about the different sorts of uses the revenue would be generated by that, what it could be used in. Water was one of them, and a jobs creation effort, shoring up the transit system, and adding additional funding for the street maintenance. And so we've been talking to various groups. I know this one's focused primarily on water, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to get to meet with some of you folks and answer some questions. We think that's a real important part of our role is engagement with the community. So I'd like to talk some about water supply. Water considerations. What we're looking at is it's similar, very parallel, very consistent with the state's 50-year water plan. We're looking at meeting community needs, and in two engagement efforts that we just went through, or we did some polling and what have you. Water supply ranked very high among those that responded. We're also looking at even if we weren't considering drought or the sales tax, just part of future water planning, we expect that we hope that population and demand will increase. And we're talking about roughly about 7 billion gallons a year increase by the time we get to 2060. And we pick 2060 because that's kind of a long-range, responsible planning horizon. And the supplies that we have now are not going to be sufficient to meet those needs. So we're going to need to do something before that about our water demand and our water supplies. One of the things we did recognize, and I think it came up in some of the questions that were asked, was what about conservation? One way to handle our water resource planning is to do it purely through new water supply. That's expensive. There's difficulties, regulatory difficulties associated with that. So one of the things we looked at was, is the answer just through new water supply, or is it also by affecting demand? And of course, that's through conservation. And we did quite a bit of research and study and actually developed an economic model that shows that the right kind of conservation along with new water supply can help you achieve your goals. So everything that we're going to talk about here is not just water supply by itself meeting our needs, but it assumes a certain amount of conservation is achieved to be able to get us to meet our objectives. One of the things I could also say about water conservation is that believe it or not, there's good water conservation and bad water conservation. If you immediately reduce, or in a short period of time reduce your demand, you also reduce the revenues that meeting that demand gives you. And so there's a period of loss revenue until growth gets you back to that prior demand. And in looking at the economics of this, we needed to make sure that we recognize this lost revenue as part of the economic equation. However, if you affect conservation in such a way that you blunt or reduce the increase in future demand, there is no lost revenue, and we call that good conservation. I'd like to use the example of the Denver area where they were facing some water difficulties, and so they launched a very aggressive and very effective water conservation program and realized a significant amount short-term, a significant amount of reduced water consumption. And because they couldn't even cover their fixed costs, they rewarded their water consumers with a emergency rate increase because they weren't able to cover their costs. So what we've decided is that let's pick the right kind of conservation, the one that makes sense, and couple that with any kind of new water supply consideration we have, because the responsible thing to do is to use both new water supply and water conservation. So we have a drought response plan. This was something that council approved. It's similar to what Tracy talked about a responsible way to respond to droughts. We have stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what it's based on is our critical, most vulnerable water supply, which is Cheney. We get water from Cheney Reservoir. We also get water from the Equus Beds aquifer up north. and that's without the ASR project, just taking water out of the ground. And the combination of those two, that's the primary water supplies for the city. Well, the one that we really have to keep an eye on in Drought is a Cheney reservoir. And as some of you may recall, back in February of 2012, we sounded the alarm and saying, we've been monitoring it, the drought conditions. We're far enough along into it now that we need to do some conservation. We need to take some steps, because if we do nothing and use exactly the same water consumption we've been using with no additional conservation, no reaction to the drought conditions that we were in, and if the drought conditions continued exactly like they had been, which is a big if, with the same Palmer Drought Severity Index that we were experiencing, how deep and how severe the drought was into the future, that if that situation continued, that we would actually run out of water in Cheney in mid-2015, 2.5 years later. And so we weren't saying that was what was going to happen, but what we were saying is, for the purposes of planning on drought response, that we needed to start thinking about changing something, because those are the consequences if those two big ifs were realized. You may recall at about that time, the communities around Wichita were already starting to cut back on watering and some of the other things, because their water resources were a little less drought resistant and they were being impacted. We fortunately have Cheney, which is a fairly drought resistant water source, but even our water sources were starting to show some signs that cause us to raise the conversation. Well, fortunately, Mother Nature came along in the middle of 2013, and we had some people say it's roughly about a 500-year storm, significant rainfall in that upper Nenaska reservoir area, and more than filled Cheney Reservoir, which really put us in a good situation for the drought. So rather than just say, phew, we dodged that one, council says, yeah, but we still want a drought response plan that really is proactive and looks at this in a very responsible sort of way. So they developed this drought response plan, and it's based on the moving average, a 12-month average of the level in the Cheney Reservoir over that 12-month period of time, what that average is. And as it slowly, so that you want to do it as an average because you don't want it to have a lot of noise in it, so you're bouncing in and out of drought response stages. And based on that level, we have stage one, which is, an enhanced public outreach for education on conservation. Stage two, where now what we're doing is we're actually limiting the outdoor watering, which is a big part of how you can respond to a drought, to where you do be doing it once a week watering restrictions. Down to stage three, where at stage three now there are no outside watering restrictions, with the exception being for those food-producing gardens and businesses that use that kind of water to golf courses, for example, turf farms, all the way down to stage four, the most draconian measure, which is no outside watering for anybody, and that includes golf. So your golf courses would basically dry up and blow away, but also a 15% reduction of water that's used inside the house, inside the business. So, and that's significant. 15% doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. So with this drought plan in place, we could actually get through a design drought and not have to run out of water and tell people you don't have water anymore. It would be very difficult in that stage four, in the last parts of the drought, but at least people wouldn't be running out of water. So now let's talk, before I go to my next slide, let's talk a little bit about the 1% versus the 2% design drought. And the question was asked about, what about 1%? Is that the appropriate level? States at 2%, and like Stacy said, that by statute, that's their design drought. It really is about risk. What sort of a risk are you comfortable with? How much are you willing to pay to buy down that risk? A 1930s Dust Bowl drought, that's roughly what a 1% drought looks like. You're supposed to have those about once every 100 years. A 2% drought every 50 years, like Tracy was saying, that was back in the 50s drought. Maybe you could statistically have a couple of those in a century. But weather is so variable. And like Tracy was saying, when you look at proxy data and go back in time, the weather has changed dramatically from century to century. And before there was industrial use of fossil fuels and what have you, the weather has changed significantly. And so, are you comfortable with the droughts of record in this century and using those as what your baseline risk posture would be, or do you want to take something more risk, more protects you against droughts in a greater level, and are you willing to pay the money for that? Well, at some point there isn't even enough water available or enough dollars available to have a zero chance of any kind of drought affecting you. These droughts that last 40 years, 30 years, 40 years, if we have one of those, there's no way that we can prepare, and it probably isn't reasonable for us to pay the money to buy down the risk to be able to sustain our operations through that kind of a risk. But is a 1% the right kind of a risk to have? And we looked at the options of what sorts of options we would need to consider for 2% and 1%, and it wasn't a big difference in cost between the 2% and the 1%. It's going to be something greater than we have now. And so what we've been telling council is, it could be 2% and 1%, and they're looking at 1% as something we'd like to at least look at the 1% and buy down the risk a little bit more than what that the 2% would have. So if you look at what a 1% drought looks like with no supply, and this is really the crux of the argument for bringing on a new supply for drought protection. If you look at the drought protection plan that's in place, and this is a hypothetical, maybe typical if there is such a thing, 1% drought. What you'd find is there's a significant amount of time that you would find yourself in stage 3 and stage 4 of the drought response plan. Now, what that means is you'd still have water. The city would still go on. We'd lose our golf courses. We'd lose our trees. People would all lose their lawns. We'd be looking at a 15% reduction inside the building that would have to be accomplished. There could potentially, I would imagine, be some sort of an economic impact on this sort of a water supply for a period of 2 years. So for nearly 6 years, you're in stage 3 and stage 4, but you get through a 1% drought if a 1% drought occurs. It may not. But just looking at the risk and the consequences of assuming that level of risk with no new water supply, that's what it looks like. Now you add about 10 million gallons a day, roughly 11,000 acre feet of water as new supply, then what you do is you find that you can prevent from getting into stage 3 or stage 4 at all. The worst stage that you find yourselves in is where you've got people having to cut back on their watering their lawns to 1 day a week, and we've been talking to some folks, and they say that would keep a lawn alive, and it's inconvenient. But now you're talking about a very different sort of a scenario in a 1% drought as you start going through the drought stages with this new water supply. That's really the argument is about why do you even want to use a water supply? Why don't we just go through the drought response plan that we have now and save ourselves a whole lot of money and headache and just use the water supplies we have now? Well, that's the difference. It's the drought stages that you find yourself in, and that new water supply, what it does is it buys you time in stage 1 and 2, and you don't have to find yourself in stage 3 and stage 4. And I suspect there'll be some questions on this, so we'll be coming back to it. So we have some options. We looked at over a dozen different options. Some of the ones that were mentioned here, we looked at reuse, indirect and direct potable reuse. That's the sewer effluent that comes out of the sewer treatment plant, roughly 30 to 40 million gallons a day just going down the river right now. Using that, treating it to drinking water standards, we looked at that. We dusted off the old reservoir plan plans that were done at looking at these various reservoir sites and looking at the yield and the costs associated with those. We looked at different technologies of using the high saline salt water. We looked at enhancing the ASR project that we have now. We've been in talks with El Dorado and being able to make use of the water that they have in that lake, a trans-basin sort of arrangement, more of a regional approach. And after winnowing it down, based mostly on yield and cost and some risks considerations on even being able to do the project, came down to really two options, and that is either enhance our ASR project or buy water from El Dorado. ASR, for some of you who aren't familiar with it, I throw that acronym out there. We basically, the Little Arkansas rivers, there are times when there's flow in that river, and what we do is we divert some of the water from that river, treat it, do some level of treatment, and then put it down into the equus beds for use later on. The advantage of the equus beds as storage is that it's not susceptible to evaporation, and so that's a place where you can store water and you don't have to worry about evaporation. Evaporation is significant. If you look at Cheney Lake during the summer, about twice as much evaporates any one day as what we pull out of the lake on that day. So you got about a 2-to-1 loss on the Cheney during the summer just through evaporation. So that's what we're talking about doing, is enhancing the ASR operation that we have right now. And we have this year, actually starting last year and fully this year, we've actually got the whole plant commissioned. It sat there idle for some time because it got finished right at the beginning of the drought, and you can only test it when you have water in the river, and in the drought, that's when you don't have the water in the river. When we got those good flows coming in the river, we were actually able to finish commissioning the treatment plant, and now we've been operating it every time there's water in the river that we can divert. We've been doing so, and that's been doing a couple of good things for us. Is that it's proven the technology. It's been putting some water into the equus beds because what we want to do is try to get the equus beds to recover a little bit from the drawdown that we did during the drought periods that we were having. And as Tracy stated, one of the other things we did is we worked out an arrangement with the Army Corps to keep a little water in the flood pool so that we can draw that water and give the equus beds some time to recover and heal up. But those are really the two options now that Council is looking at. And what I can say is, more recently, we've been talking with El Dorado, and they've brought us yet another option to consider, and we're looking at that right now. It's not treated water being brought into our system. It's raw water being brought from the lake and then being treated at our treatment plant, and a unit cost associated with that, and we're evaluating that right now. But right now, it's some sort of a purchase from El Dorado or some enhancements to the ASR plant that we have right now. And when we look at the treated water, at the time that we did this, and we've learned a lot since these numbers were put together and the white papers were done and the talking circuit has been done, we were looking at something in the order of looking at with the tax funding and without the tax funding. These are the total costs, both the capital and the operating costs through the entire planning period through 2060. And as you can see, ASR improvements is the least expensive based on this analysis compared to the drinking water standards. But we did meet, our consultants did meet with El Dorado's consultants to true up, if you will, the assumptions that were in these costs. And there's some disagreement about what the operating costs could be, and that's going to drive this cost because it's carried over for such a long 43 years. And we came up with a range, and it looks like even with that range, the drinking water still perhaps is not as attractive just purely from an economic standpoint. But with the raw water option, that could be the most attractive option, and we're looking at it even today as we're talking. But the important thing is that if you do this with a sales tax, it's going to be a less impact to rates. And the reason is obvious. Rather than you raising the capital costs, the $250 million from rates, what you do instead is you get it from the sales tax. That's why the rate impact is less. And one of the other things I might mention here too is that when you look at this number, say for example, no sales tax funding, 6.2%, that's a little bit deceiving in that that doesn't represent a rate impact. That represents a total revenue increase over the period of time to cover that. And actual rates that you would be looking at are going to be something more or less than that over that period of time. And we'll come to that here in a slide and to show you that with rates without a new supply, this is what we're looking at anyway. Whether or not we add a new supply or not, we still have rate increases projected out for the next 10 years, and these have been brought to the council each year as they adjust the rates. And as you can see, we've got a little catching up to do here. They've put some extra money in replacing water mains and replacing some of our infrastructure that's past its useful remaining life, where we get out to about 2018 and beyond, and we're saying, you know, if we've guessed right and we think we've kind of more or less caught up on some of this more worn assets, then you're looking at something around a 3% from that point on, just to cover the cost of inflation and built into the rates. What we're talking about as far as an increase for this new water supply would be on top of these rate increases. These rate increases are to cover our current operations and our current debt and our current expenses. So the way it really looks then is if you look, and this is maybe a little bit hard to see from way out there, but if you look at the that black line represents the previous slide. That's the amount of money that the rate increases that you're going to see regardless of whether we add a new water supply or not. The green line, what that represents is the El Dorado expense, or the most expensive El Dorado option. The least expensive is the El Dorado 10 MGD, but both of those you see are somewhere up in the 10 to 18, those are all up around the 10 or 18% annual increases for some period of time. And without a sales tax, your total costs are going to be greater because you have to issue debt to cover the expenses of building these plants. And in order to do that, then you're going to have to pay the cost of that debt, the interest payments, in additional to the principal. That would carry on for some period of time at those higher rates until the debt was paid off, the 20-year bonds were retired, and then you could see conceivably a dip in rates because you no longer have that expense that you're covering in that over that those bonds. So when you look at the actual increase, that when we're talking about a 6.2 versus a 1.6, that's for comparison purposes. It's important to note that does not equate to a 6 point something rate increase. And you can say, well, why would I want to? I'm looking at my bill and I increase it by 6%, and I look at that compared to what I'd be paying on sales tax. It's deceiving in that sense. What you'd be looking at is something around in the order of 10-15% for 4 years on your water bill now, and then it would stay at that level out until 20 years, and then it would go down because the debt has been paid off. So I know that's kind of a difficult concept certainly difficult to communicate, probably even more difficult for you to understand what I'm saying. But the point being that in comparison, why would we do this with sales tax versus without the sales tax? It's a significant. The total costs are significantly greater if we do it without the sales tax, as far as the rate impact is concerned, and the total costs are greater because you have to do it with debt, whereas you don't have to have the cost of debt with the sales tax. So that's this part here. And Pete had some comments he wanted to make. And Pete, I'll go ahead and give it to you, and then I'll stand for any kind of questions you might have.
Thanks, Alan. I hope that was pretty clear as mud, so to speak. Mr. Franco, thank you and Kansas Policy Institute for hosting this. I appreciate you all being here. And Tracy Streeter, it's good to have you here and see you. And thanks for all the work you've done with our burden here and locally on that. I just thought this might be a good time to also present a couple of facts. I say settle the dust or stir the dust about a quote sales tax, and all I want to do is just present some facts that and dispel maybe some misnomers. What you have here is just a sampling of current sales tax around the Wichita metro area, and frankly, I'm proud to say that Wichita, it is the upper left-hand corner, we have exactly zero sales tax today in Wichita City. Sedgwick County, we have a 1% sales tax that impacts, well, for instance, those first three. So there's your total tax on the next to that. So this is in the Wichita area. These are numbers that are supplied by it's online. It's a great website, the Kansas Department of Revenue. You can get on it any time and see any of the taxes on anything. There's about, I don't want to misquote, there's about 800 taxing agencies in our state, sales tax agencies. There's 105 counties. There's about 500 municipalities. And then there's about another 250 special taxing authorities. If you go to Kansas City, you'll see maybe 15 different taxing authorities, TIF districts, et cetera. Wichita has about 7 or 8 within that as well. So that's what I'm saying. There's 800 taxing authorities. You can download it on an Excel spreadsheet. You can sort it. You can do whatever you want to do with it. It's pretty interesting, and I'd strongly urge if any of you want to know about that to get on that at any time. And these are the rates effective July 1st. They post these rates quarterly. Talk to the Topeka person, and so you see there it's March 1st, July 1st, and all the updates that happen in between there. So what you have there is an example. I would note that Newton has 0% sales tax, but Harvey County has a 2% sales tax. So that just gives you a sampling of the Wichita area. And the next slide, that's just a sampling. I just took some cities, random cities in other Kansas areas. Again, there's Wichita on the top line. We always get compared to Johnson County a lot. Johnson County, as a county, has a 1.225 county sales tax. And then if you go to, you all know the cities, Overland Park, Olathe, whatever, pick a city, and they have a city tax on top of the county tax. Kansas City, Wyandotte has a 1%, Kansas City has a 1.6. Topeka, 1.5 on top of Shawnee County, 1.5. Dodge City, 1 on top of Ford County's 1.65. Emporia, 1 on top of 1. Manhattan, Kansas, 1.25 on top of 1. Salina, Coffeyville has a 3% sales tax. Coffee County has 0. This has been quite an exercise for me because I just wanted to make sure I knew the facts before I got further into any of this. The state of Kansas, by a state legislator, 3% is the most that a municipality can put on a sales tax, and Coffeyville currently has that 3%. I'd like to also note, I'm going back to the first slide that's in your packet. On the far right-hand side, there's the mill levy currently in this area, and I'm proud to also say that this was done way before my time. I came on in April of 11. That when it was voted to do the 1 cent sales tax countywide, that the next year in '86, the city of Wichita lowered their city mill levy from about 44 to about 32, give or take a 0.07. Okay, and it's remained at that mill levy since then. A couple of comments, and actually the neat thing about that sales tax, the language in that 85 sales tax was specific that the city could not raise the mill levy. And so they took, so that's basically a 25% reduction in the mill levy. So if you just took Wichita and you see Derby's 47, Hayesville's 48, whatever, I mean, they all got quite extensive mill levies. A mill levy, to refresh everybody, so 32.50 means $32 per thousand of your assessed valuation on your property. City of Wichita is not involved in the assessment of property. That's the county assessor. The county assessor works under rules set by the state government. So all the counties in the state use the rules set by the state to assess your property. The City of Wichita has no say-so in anybody's property value. We apply 32.5 against your assessed value. So I thought that was important to note. I'd also like to, a couple of other parts, Alan's presentation, if you go back to the city sales tax, of course, we're saying all this. It's been said that we had a 50-year water supply. That is true. It's never said we have a 50-year water supply unless we have a drought. We have a 50-year water supply if we have rains like we've had. And we can do nothing, and we'll have 50-year water supply if we have no drought. Same could be said, I see Mitch Mitchell in the audience. I don't know what they went through, but we didn't need to do the big ditch if we didn't have flash rainfall. So I don't know. You know, as a city council guy, do we plan for 50 years for all the things? It's a daunting task, no question. That's why a cost like this, a one-time cost. The other thing that I think is important, there's 146,000 water bills that the city provides. So not 146,000 meters, 146,000 bills, accounts. And we supply water not only to Wichita, but to Sedgwick County, a lot of communities, Derby, whatever. Okay, Standard & Poor is our bond rating agency, and we still have a high, a very positive bond rating today. Standard & Poor recognizes in their executive summary that the City of Wichita serves 1 million people. There's 380,000 Wichitans, 500,000 Sedgwick County, but if you think about it, just by geography alone, we are the center of because we're isolated where we're at. You go to Salina, Emporia, they're making decisions. Where do they go to shop, spend their money? Even western Kansas, kind of an egg-shaped market. Northern Oklahoma, Ponca City makes decisions all the time. They fly out of Wichita versus Oklahoma City. So, 1 million people. And I've had other car dealers and others tell me the same. Their market, they feel, stretches to these areas. So we serve 1 million people. Then I also checked into, and we have 6 million visitors a year to our city. That's by 2 different sources of visitors bureaus. One's the state and one's another. And you can kind of do simple math. We do just 1 million hotel rooms a year, something just over that. We do 1 million hotel nights. So if it's 2 people a night, that's 2 million. And then they say people that just do day trips and people that come and visit family and stay. So it's not our numbers. These are other numbers. So we have 1 million that we serve. We have 6 million visitors a year. We have 146,000 water bills, of which probably each one of you are one of the 146,000. So if we're going to do this and burden, we can have the 146,000 pay for what 1 million people use, or we can ask 1 million people that use our city to take 4 or 5 years and help pay for the water on their purchases. It doesn't, and I don't feel that I'm I don't know what word I should use, arrogant enough to sit on as one of 7 city council members and say, I think this is what we ought to do or not. This is such a big, daunting task that I think the citizen input and all the things we've been doing is very important to do that. There might be a question about the county sales tax, why we already have one. Well, we do have a county sales tax, and this falls into my theory that I've learned about the citizens of Wichita are very charitable people, because we pay if you're a citizen of Wichita, you pay 76% of the revenue of that county sales tax. The county grabs it and distributes it out by formula, and the city of Wichita gets back 58%. So we help fund already many communities outside our city limits, which is fine. Kind of falls into a lot of my frustration about the casino, where casino says that Wichita citizens are 88% of their revenue, and then they take that revenue and lower Sumner County's property tax. They give every kid $50 Visa card that's in school. They give every teacher $500 in Sumner County to do stuff, and they send a bunch to Topeka, and I think they send $1 million as a token over to Sedgwick County, and Wichita gets nothing. So it falls just in line. When I found that out, I thought, well, it's just like this casino. We are a very, very charitable city. We're taking care of a lot of people. So I just thought that some of this needs to be noted. Our debt in Wichita, we just had our audited financial statements. Two things of importance. At the end of 2012, December 31st, 2012, our total debt in Wichita, as I heard before I got in office, is going to be $1 billion of debt. It was $1,005 million at the December 31st of 2012. Because of prudent management, delayed projects, resized projects, refinanced debt, a number of reasons, and not do some projects, at the end of 2013, 1 year later, we're now at $890 million in debt. It's a drastic reduction and one that I applaud. And of that $890 million in debt, $600 million of it, a little more than $600 million, is wrapped up into three things: special assessments, all these neighborhoods and commercial properties that wanted to do left turn signals or build something in the specials. There's about $200 million plus is tied up in special assessments that property owners are paying, but city has to guarantee. So that's part of that debt. The other $400 million is wrapped up in debt for water and sewer projects over the years that is paid by ratepayers. Again, I go back to the 146,000 billable clients we have. So from a debt perspective in the city of Wichita, it's very healthy. $890 million in debt, but $600 million of it is directly related to people that are already paying that way. So really we've got, it's really something to be proud, I think, right now. And also on property tax, personal property tax, I mean, not personal property tax, your residential property, because of the mill levy drop, and you know, there's lines in the sand that happen. There was a way to do security in a large way before 9/11 happened. Then 9/11 happens, and everybody reevaluates the way security is, and it's a whole different game. There was a way to do things in the government, and then 2008 happened, and it changed a lot of lives, from your personal life to the way government should function. I think it was a real eye-opener. Again, I came in 2011. So if you look after 2008, 2009, which is now 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 5 years, the property tax revenue, your residential property tax revenue for the city of Wichita under audited financial statement has remained at about $105 million a year, up or down about $1 million. So Wichita has maintained, is not increased. We had not increased the mill levy. The assessed valuation has not gone up. I think a lot of you probably saw some years your assessed valuation went down. So we have maintained, there's only three ways that revenue can grow: mill levy, which I doubt will ever happen; assessed valuation, which is in the control of the state's rules and the county assessor; or growth. Growth meaning adding homes and taking buildings and get them on the tax rolls. So that's the only thing. So I just thought those things are worth noting as background. I think it's an incredibly healthy discussion to have. I never thought when I got in office we would be challenged with something like this. I would prefer fluoride and trash and more simple things like that. But this one is a daunting task. And we supply water to 25% of the revenue. 20% or 20 or 25, I don't know what it is exactly, but we do a lot of the state's economy. and we're a lot of the state's population. We're burdened with that. I get a lot of advice from a lot of people. If I had my way, I would take all these assets and have a water authority combined with all of the counties that use us, all of the cities that use us, and have a water authority, own the assets, own the billing, own the ability to charge rates. And Wichita, as a city, is out of the water business. But whenever I bring that up, the communities I talk to, like you talk about closed lips, it's crickets when I bring that up. So I don't think anybody wants to do a water authority. Everybody wants Wichita to keep doing it, baby. We'll just criticize you, but we're going to give you all these ideas, but you keep doing it because we don't want to do a water authority at all. So with that said, I thought it's worth showing a few facts. I'm not advocating for or against. 146,000 people can do it. We don't have to do anything. And if we have a drought, Alan did a nice job of saying rates would, if we have a drought, rates would be impacted.